So imagine for a second that you are sitting in a private jet. Like, it's custom designed, leather seats, the works.
Oh, the absolute dream scenario, right.
Right, the dream. You're a billionaire. You have won the economic game by literally every metric society respects. But your heart is just absolutely pounding out of your chest with anxiety. Your jaw is clenched. You can't sleep, all because you just found out this specific model of jet is a year old, and your rival just bought the upgraded version with a slightly better cruising speed.
That is such a vivid picture of modern stress.
It is. You are totally enveloped in luxury, yet completely consumed by misery. Now, cut to a completely different scene. A guy is pedaling a rusty, squeaky 10-year-old bicycle down this loud, smoggy street. The chain slips occasionally, but he looks down at the handlebars, takes a deep breath of that smoggy air, and feels a profound, almost overwhelming sense of gratitude.
He's just happy to be moving.
Exactly. He is radiating pure joy just for the fact that the wheels are turning. So today's deep dive is about the mathematical, psychological formula that makes the guy on the bicycle the ultimate winner and the billionaire on the jet a tragic failure of human optimization.
I love that framing.
Welcome to the deep dive. We are exploring a truly remarkable document today, simply titled Handbook of Life, and we are going to look really closely at how it completely deconstructs our modern obsession with control.
It really is a total deconstruction. I mean, we have a fascinating stack of notes here to go through. We're looking at a text that weaves together profound theological concepts, intricate Arabic linguistics, and incredibly raw human psychology.
Yeah, the sources are just incredibly diverse.
They really are. We're drawing on the author's personal reflections, verses from the Quran, and several very prominent hadith sayings of the Prophet Muhammad to understand this cohesive worldview.
Which is quite a task.
Right, but the core mission of this deep dive is to map out the precise formula the author presents for navigating the sheer chaos and anxiety of human existence. It's a formula that demands we abandon our relentless drive to be, like, the architects of our own destiny.
Which is hard for us to do.
Oh, it goes against everything we're taught. It asks us instead to embrace a concept that is, frankly, terrifying to the modern ego, which is absolute, uncompromising zero-ness.
Okay, let's unpack this, because the text does not ease you into the shallow end at all. It drops a massive anchor right off the bat regarding the true, singular objective of life.
Yeah, it doesn't pull any punches.
Not at all. The premise here is that human beings are fundamentally wired for one ultimate goal, which is seeking the love and the rizā, meaning the pleasure or approval of Allah, and prioritizing the akhirat, the afterlife, over everything occurring in this temporary world.
That's the baseline.
Right, and if you misalign that objective, like if you try to swap out that primary goal with career success or social status, or even just curating a perfectly comfortable earthly life, you're essentially guaranteeing your own psychological destruction.
Which brings us to a really striking phrase the author uses. They observe that modern humans have perfected the art of being miserable.
Perfected the art of being miserable. That is so accurate.
It really is a precise diagnosis of our contemporary human condition. The author points out that we have this incredibly dark magic where we take our name-ats, our blessings, and somehow systematically transmute them into sources of pure anxiety.
We really need to look at the underlying mechanics of why we do this. Why do we take a name-at, a genuine blessing, an influx of resources, a relationship, a talent, and immediately weaponize it against our own peace of mind?
Well, the framework here suggests that it comes down to a fundamental misunderstanding of where peace actually originates. Logically speaking, if your peace of mind is tethered to external circumstances, you are playing a game you are mathematically guaranteed to lose.
Because the world is just too unpredictable.
Exactly. External circumstances are inherently volatile. Markets crash, bodies age, relationships fracture, private jets become obsolete. So, true peace, the text argues, has to be a state of contentment that exists entirely independent of the presence or absence of external problems.
Right. It's that realization that you're trying to anchor a ship to a cloud. It's just not going to hold.
That's a great way to put it.
The author actually gets deeply personal about this realization, too. They mention going through the most difficult tests of their life, facing compounding crises. And the breaking point, like the real epiphany, was realizing that they possessed exactly zero capability to fix the external chaos.
The levers of control were just completely stripped away.
Totally gone. So the only logical pivot, the only survival strategy left, was to focus entirely on maintaining internal peace of mind regardless of the external storm.
And that pivot shifts the entire landscape of how we interact with our own lives. Think about the billionaire in the jet versus the guy on the bike that you opened with.
Right, let's go back to that.
The object itself has zero inherent emotional value. I mean, a jet is just metal and fuel. A bike is just gears and rubber. The object does not dictate the psychological state.
The internal posture of the human interacting with the object dictates the state.
Precisely. A name-at only solidifies into an actual blessing through the active lens of appreciation. Without appreciation, that same object is just another variable to manage, another asset to lose, another point of comparison.
You know, I hear this, and it sounds beautifully stoic on the surface, but I have to bring up a massive friction point here.
Sure, go for it.
When I read this insistence on accepting everything, this idea that the guy on the rusty bike should just smile and be perfectly content, doesn't that fundamentally undermine the entire engine of human progress?
The complacency argument.
Yeah, exactly. If you are entirely focused on internal peace and you don't let external problems bother you, why would you ever try to fix them? Why build a better bike? Why invent penicillin? Why fight against a corrupt system? If the ultimate goal is just sitting in the storm and being completely unbothered, aren't we just talking about a theology of absolute complacency?
That is exactly the trap most people fall into when encountering this philosophy. And it's a crucial distinction we need to tease out because it assumes that action is inextricably linked to anxiety.
Because we usually think stress drives action.
Right. The modern mindset believes that unless you are stressed about a problem, you won't solve it. Stress is viewed as the necessary fuel for ambition, but this text completely severs that link. It is not advocating for a cessation of action. It is advocating for a cessation of internal agony.
Okay, walk me through how that actually works in practice. How do you pursue a cure for a disease without being internally agonized by the disease?
Think about the concept of optimization. In our modern paradigm, you believe you are solely responsible for optimizing your life. You have to gather the data, anticipate the future, make the perfect moves, and if you fail, the burden of that failure rests entirely on your shoulders.
Which is an unbearable cognitive load.
Exactly. What this framework suggests is shifting the burden of the outcome. You still act. You still pedal the bike, you still go to the lab to research the medicine, you still advocate for justice, but you do it while recognizing your inherent powerlessness over the final result.
So you decouple the effort from the expectation.
Yes, you do your part, but you transfer the ultimate responsibility for the optimization to a higher infinite power.
So it's the difference between a frantic passenger trying to steer a train from the back seat versus a mechanic calmly fixing an engine while trusting the conductor to drive. You're still working, but you're not carrying the existential terror of the destination.
Precisely. You are freeing up the immense mental bandwidth that is usually utterly consumed by worry, dread, and regret. You act, but you drop the delusion that you are the master of the universe.
The author puts it quite bluntly, actually, stating, I have realized I am completely incapable of this, or, for that matter, much else.
It's a profound unburdening. But to access that freedom, to actually put down that heavy luggage of perceived control, you have to pass through a very specific gate. You have to admit your own inherent flaw. You have to admit that you are fundamentally broken and incapable.
And that leads us straight into the architecture of forgiveness in this document, which is just brilliant. It doesn't treat forgiveness as some secondary housekeeping task you do on the weekends.
No, it's not a side quest.
Right. Seeking istighfar, asking for forgiveness and guidance, is positioned as the absolute core mechanism of human existence. It is the primary job description.
Because if you truly accept your own powerlessness, asking for help is the only logical default state. But the text draws a razor-sharp, incredibly dangerous line between asking for forgiveness and the human tendency to justify our sins.
Here's where it gets really interesting. This is where the contrast between Adam and Shaitan comes into play, and it's a psychological masterclass.
It really highlights two totally different paths.
Exactly. When Adam made his monumental error, what did he do? He just admitted it, he owned the flaw, he recognized his zero-ness, and he sought forgiveness. But Shaitan took a completely different psychological route.
He rationalized.
Yes, he justified his disobedience based on his perceived superiority being made of fire rather than clay. The author issues this chilling warning here. They say justification is not just a character flaw, it is a direct pathway to kufr, to disbelief.
We really need to linger on the psychology of rationalization because our current culture is practically built on it. We are trained almost from birth to be high-powered defense attorneys for our own egos.
Oh, constant.
If we mess up, we instantly generate an entire dossier of external reasons. I lost my temper because I was sleep deprived, or I was dishonest because the system is rigged, or I hurt that person because of my own unhealed trauma.
We manage our internal PR constantly.
Exactly. We use therapy speak to shield ourselves from basic accountability.
It's so true. We construct these elaborate narratives to protect the idea that we are still basically perfect, just misunderstood or victimized by circumstance.
Yeah.
We refuse to just look in the mirror and say, no, I am just deeply flawed. I chose poorly. I am broken.
And that is exactly why the text equates justification with kuf. When you justify a sin, you are doing something far more insidious than just committing a bad act. You are attempting to rewrite the fundamental moral architecture of the universe to accommodate your ego.
Wow, that's heavy.
It is. You are saying, the rule is wrong, my action was actually correct given the circumstances. You elevate your own rationale above the divine decree. That is the exact arrogant posture of shaitan.
Whereas admitting the flaw, simply stating, I broke the rule, I have no excuse, I am entirely reliant on your mercy, that keeps the moral compass intact.
It affirms the hierarchy. You remain zero, and the infinite remains infinite.
I want to focus on that phrase for a second, absolute zeroness, because the author explicitly writes, key lesson to achieve anything. It is to realize our own absolute zeroness and powerlessness and humility.
It's such a countercultural idea.
Completely. In
Yeah.
any other context, telling someone they are an absolute zero is a devastating insult. But here, it is the skeleton key to the entire universe. It's not about wallowing in self-hatred or toxic shame. It's in alignment with reality. It's a mathematical statement.
Right.
Seeking istifar is just a continuous self-recognition of being flawed. You are just constantly syncing up with the truth of your own limitations.
And it removes all the psychological friction. Think of how much energy we waste pretending to be whole, pretending to be in control, projecting competence. When you finally embrace the zeroness, all that energy is returned to you.
That makes a lot of sense.
But this immediately provokes a massive theological question. If a human being actually achieves this, if you strip away all your ego, all your rationalizations, and present yourself to the divine as an absolute flawed zero, how is that received?
Is it met with a sigh of divine frustration? A reluctant nod?
Exactly. Because if you look at human power structures, usually when someone's subordinate comes crawling back admitting total failure, the boss is annoyed.
All right, fine, I'll clean up your mess again, but don't let it happen next quarter.
Right. That is our default assumption of how authority reacts to weakness. But the text shatters that projection using one of the most vivid, emotionally overwhelming hadiths I have ever encountered.
Oh, this story is incredible.
It's from Sahih Muslim, reported by Anas bin Malik and Harith bin Suwaid, and it paints a picture of divine joy that is almost impossible to comprehend.
It is a phenomenal use of narrative to try and map an infinite concept onto a finite human emotional spectrum. Let's put the listener squarely in this scenario.
Yes, put yourself in this environment. Imagine you're traveling alone through a barren, waterless desert.
The heat is oppressive. The sand stretches to the horizon in every direction.
And your entire survival depends on one thing, your camel. Strapped to this animal is every single drop of water you have, every morsel of food. And in a moment of distraction, the camel bolts.
It just runs off into the dunes and disappears.
You chase it. You walk for hours under the blinding sun, scanning the horizon until your muscles give out. The thirst becomes absolute agony. Your throat closes up. You realize with total, chilling certainty that you are going to die here.
There is no rescue.
None. You lose all hope. The text describes the person lying down in the shadow of a meager bush, placing their head on their hands and simply waiting for the end. You surrender to death. Your eyes close.
And then a sound wakes you. You open your eyes, and standing right over you, with his reins trailing in the sand, fully loaded with your water and your food, is your camel.
Stop right there and analyze the biochemical reality of that moment. What happens to the human brain when you go from the absolute certainty of agonizing death to the sudden, miraculous guarantee of life in a fraction of a second?
It is a shockwave of euphoria.
It is a relief so profound that it essentially short-circuits the frontal lobe.
It totally shorts out, because the hadith notes that the man leaps up, grabs the camel's nose string, and in a state of absolute delirious joy, screams out, "O Lord, thou art my servant, and I am thine Lord."
He completely bungles the cosmic hierarchy.
He calls God his servant. It's this incredibly human, almost comical slip of the tongue born out of pure emotional overload.
And the theological payload of the story is delivered with stunning force. The Hadith states that Allah is more pleased with a servant's repentance when a human turns back in istighfar than this dying man is at finding his camel.
Let that sink in. The author of the text admits, I cannot think of any deed for which Allah has such a response.
It's hard to wrap your head around.
We project our human bureaucratic annoyance onto the divine. We think of a stern judge reluctantly stamping a pardon. But the reality presented here is a creator who experiences a joy equivalent to being snatched back from the brink of annihilation, just because a flawed human being said, I messed up, I'm coming back.
It requires a complete paradigm shift. It tells us that the divine is deeply, passionately invested in the return of the human soul. You are not a nuisance. Your brokenness is not an irritant. It is the exact mechanism through which this profound connection is forged.
But to truly grasp the mechanics of why the divine responds this way, why the architecture of existence is built around this dynamic of the lost returning, we have to look closely at the very specific language that the text analyzes.
Right. And this is where the author brings in a linguistic deep dive that completely rewired my understanding of the word God.
Yeah, the author explicitly notes that this linguistic discovery helped me tremendously in life. They examine the Arabic root of the word ilah, which is the word for God or deity. The root is made up of three letters, aleph, lam, and ha.
In Arabic, the root letters carry the foundational DNA of the word's meaning. The author pulls from classical lexicons to show us the nuanced definitions embedded in this root, and they aren't what a Western secular mind might expect.
Not at all.
The root implies achieving peace and mental calm by seeking refuge. It implies becoming frightened of an impending disaster and finding shelter. It denotes turning to someone eagerly because of intense, overwhelming feelings.
But there's one specific, highly visual definition in the lexicon that just stopped me in my tracks. The root ilah also specifically translates to the lost offspring of the she-camel rushing to snuggle up to its mother on finding it.
It's such a gentle image.
I mean, think about the intimacy of that image. When we think of a deity, the cultural trope is a distant, booming voice, lightning bolts, a grand architect removed from the messiness of creation. But the literal linguistic root implies the desperate, primal, full-body relief of a terrified baby animal finding the warmth and safety of its mother.
It entirely reframes the psychological posture of worship. It moves worship away from a transactional duty like something you do to avoid punishment or earn points, and frames it as a primal, biological necessity. It's the instinctual drive for safety.
The author internalizes this to such a degree that they write, I just approach Allah telling him, I am the baby camel and I have come back.
I am the baby camel. That completely strips away the ego. You can't be a proud, self-optimizing master of the universe if you are actively identifying as a lost baby camel. You are vulnerable, you are scared, and you need comfort.
And from this deep linguistic root, the text extracts a logical framework. It outlines 4 necessary conditions for adoration or true worship to actually exist. If these 4 things aren't present, you aren't really worshiping. You're just going through the motions.
These 4 conditions are a brilliant synthesis of the psychology we've been discussing. Condition 1 is straightforward but vital distress.
Right, distress.
You must be in a state of need. If you believe you are completely self-sufficient, if your ego convinces you that you have no problems, you cannot truly seek shelter. A baby camel that thinks it knows the way through the desert doesn't cry out for its mother.
Exactly. You have to feel the wind chill to appreciate the fire. Condition 2 is superiority. The entity you turn to must possess the actual capability to save you. It has to be superior in power and status. You don't seek shelter from a tsunami behind a sandcastle.
Condition 3 is where the text introduces a highly sophisticated psychological insight mystery, or invisibility.
This one is fascinating.
The author uses a fantastic analogy here to explain why this is necessary for adoration. Imagine you are an employee. You work for a month, you generate value, and at the end of the month, your boss hands you a paycheck.
A standard transaction.
Right. That transaction is fully visible. The cause and effect are completely perceptible to your senses. You worked, you got paid. Because the mechanism is obvious and earthly, there is zero sentiment of adoration involved. You don't fall to your knees in profound reverence for the payroll department.
It's clinical. Like putting $1 in a vending machine and getting a soda. You aren't in awe of the vending machine.
No, not at all.
But adoration requires awe. It requires an invisible power, Fulfilling a need through means you cannot fully calculate or control. It's the difference between cashing a paycheck and being stranded in that desert, waiting to die, and having the camel mysteriously return. One is a transaction, the other is a miracle that commands complete reverence.
Exactly. The mystery preserves the hierarchy. And finally, condition 4 is eagerness. It's not a reluctant submission. It is turning eagerly with intense feeling to that source of peace.
So when you combine these distress, superiority, mystery, and eagerness, you get the full emotional spectrum of Ella. You get the baby camel running to the mother.
Right.
Okay, so if we operate from this premise, if I am the baby camel, entirely dependent, completely flawed, and seeking an invisible superior shelter, it implies something really jarring about my own autonomy.
It does.
If I'm lost in the desert, it means my internal compass is fundamentally broken. And the text does not shy away from this. It makes a massive, very uncomfortable assertion about who actually controls our internal state.
It drives right at the heart of the modern illusion of emotional control. The text insists, without caveat, that human beings have absolutely zero control over their own hearts.
Zero. None.
None. The author points to the Prophet Muhammad's most frequent supplication, Ya muqallibal qulub thabit qalbi ala dinik. O turner of the hearts, make my heart steadfast in adhering to your religion.
The turner of hearts.
The author references the theological concept that the hearts of all mankind are, metaphorically, between two fingers of Ahriman's fingers, and he turns them in any direction as he wills. Now, if you look at that through the lens of modern individualism, it sounds like a nightmare.
It sounds incredibly stressful.
Yeah.
If I don't even control my own feelings, my own faith, how am I supposed to navigate? What if my heart just gets turned in the wrong direction?
It sounds like a total negation of free will regarding your deepest emotional and spiritual states.
No.
But look at the text's application of this concept. It frames this lack of control not as a terror, but as the ultimate psychological relief.
Yes.
Think about the burden of trying to constantly monitor, diagnose, and fix your own spiritual state. When your faith wavers or you feel disconnected, the modern impulse is to panic and try to self-optimize.
Oh, absolutely. You read more books, you try different routines, you agonize over your lack of focus.
You treat your heart like a broken engine that you must repair.
Right. You carry the guilt of not feeling inspired enough.
But if you truly accept that you cannot control your heart, that the steering wheel is literally not in your hands, your job description completely changes. You stop trying to perform open-heart surgery on yourself. Your only responsibility is to constantly, humbly ask the turner of hearts to keep it steady.
You outsource the heavy lifting of spiritual maintenance to the infinite.
Exactly.
That makes so much sense. The author explicitly notes keeping your heart on the Dean would, of course, include the emotional connection. So even the very feeling of faith, the warmth of it, isn't a KPI you have to hit. It's a gift you simply ask for.
Yes, it's a request, not a metric.
But the text is clear that this isn't an excuse to just sit in a dark room and do nothing. Finding guidance, finding that connection, is still an active process. The author uses this wild, incredibly modern analogy. They say that navigating this life isn't just a data collection and analysis exercise. They compare it to a multiplayer game or a job interview.
It's a brilliant pedagogical tool to bring these ancient concepts into the 21st century. In a complex video game, the environment is laced with clues. The developer designed the world to be solvable, but you have to engage with the mechanics of the game to uncover the path.
Right. The text quotes Surah 41, verse 53, where the promise is made that Allah will show his signs in the universe and within our own selves until the truth becomes absolutely manifest. The data is out there. The clues are heavily populated in the environment.
But here's where the job interview aspect becomes critical. If the signs are ubiquitous, if the code is written into the stars, into biology, into human psychology, why is it that not everyone can read the code?
Exactly. If the game is designed to be one, and the signs are everywhere, why do so many people look at the exact same universe, the exact same trees and stars and suffering, and conclude that it's all just random, meaningless noise? If it's obvious, why the massive divergence in human belief?
The text anticipates this exact friction and addresses it through Surah 40, verse 13. The verse states, "It is he who shows you his signs and sends down to you from the sky provision, but none will remember except he who turns back in repentance." The author identifies this as a divine falsification test.
A falsification test. So the signs are basically encrypted data.
Precisely. The universe is broadcasting a signal, but the signal is encrypted. And the decryption key is not raw intelligence. It is not having a high IQ or a PhD in astrophysics or immense wealth. The only decryption key is the psychological posture we've been talking about: humility, zero-ness, and repentance.
Wow.
The text argues that if you approach the universe with arrogance, if you approach the interview demanding that the employer prove their worth to you, on your specific terms, you are permanently locked out of the system.
You have to accept him on his terms, not our own, the author writes. The arrogant mind looks at the universe like a skeptical data analyst saying, I will only believe if you show me a sign in this specific format right now. And the universe responds with radio silence.
The data remains noise.
You cannot read the code unless you first adopt the posture of the baby camel. Humility isn't just a nice moral trait. It is the literal cognitive prerequisite for perceiving reality.
It's a profound epistemological claim. It argues that moral state dictates intellectual perception. But once you do use that key, once you turn back in humility and the data decrypts, the text argues that the universe fundamentally shifts in front of your eyes. You stop seeing random chaos and you start seeing a rigid set of spiritual physics.
This is where the document transitions from deep philosophy to incredibly hardcore, practical structural rules. The author treats the promises made in the divine texts not as poetic metaphors, but as absolute, immutable laws of cause and effect.
They are treated with the exact same weight as the laws of gravity or thermodynamics.
And the text provides specific equations. It states that Istafar asking for forgiveness directly and mechanically increases wealth in children. Refraining from asking other human beings for favors directly results in internal contentment. Being consciously grateful directly increases the flow of blessings. These are framed as ironclad algorithms of the universe.
To back up the guarantee of these physics, to prove that the system can actually handle all these requests, the text brings in a massive, sprawling Hadith Qudsi narrated by Abu Dhar al-Ghifari.
This part blew my mind.
And the language here is designed to completely shatter the human mind's default setting, which is a mindset of extreme scarcity. Our entire economic and psychological reality is built on scarcity. If I have a piece of the pie, you have less of the pie. Resources are finite.
Right, zero-sum game.
The Hadith Qudsi is a direct assault on that cognitive limitation. It is a staggering declaration of absolute infinite capacity and total divine independence.
Listen to the scale of this quote. It says, O my servants, if the first of you and the last of you and the humans of you and the jinn of you were all as pious as the most pious heart of any individual amongst you, then this would not increase my kingdom an iota.
It establishes the baseline.
And goes on to say that if everyone were as wicked as the most wicked heart, it wouldn't decrease the kingdom an iota.
The divine does not need you. Your worship, your rule following, doesn't generate energy for the creator. It's entirely a mechanism designed for the benefit of the human being. But the Hadith goes further to address the concept of provision, of risk.
And this is where we get the needle in the ocean imagery, which is mathematically beautiful. The Hadith says, imagine if every single human and jinn, from the very first one created to the very last one at the end of time, all stood together in one massive gathering. And every single entity asked for whatever they wanted. Unlimited wishes.
A mind-boggling scenario.
And imagine Allah gave every single one of them exactly what they requested. Fulfilling all of that would decrease what the divine possesses. No more than a needle dipped into the ocean decreases the volume of the ocean.
Think about the physics of that for a second. You take a stainless steel needle, you dip it into the Pacific Ocean, and you pull it out. Maybe, at the very tip, a microscopic, almost invisible droplet of water clings to the metal.
If that.
Has the ocean been diminished? Has its depth changed? Has its power waned?
Not at all. That microscopic droplet is the sum total of every human desire from the beginning of time to the end. The ocean is infinite.
Okay, but this logically leads to a massive, screaming question. If the resources are infinite, if handing out 1 billion private jets wouldn't even register as a drop on the needle, and the creator's infinitely generous, why is there a guy on a rusty bike? Why does anyone suffer? Why is there poverty, sickness, and heartbreak?
That is the ultimate question, isn't it?
This brings us to what I consider the absolute core, the most radical and practical application of this entire Handbook of Life. It forces us to synthesize everything we've discussed. It all comes down to how the author understands the specific names and attributes of Allah. The text highlights concepts like perfect rizā, meaning the absolute flawless provider, and shafi, the perfect healer.
Flawless is the key word there.
Exactly. If you operate from the premise that the provider is flawless and the resources are an infinite ocean, then the lack of a specific provision in your life cannot be due to scarcity, and it cannot be due to an error.
The logic locks in perfectly. The author writes, perfect razik and shaith means he is the best possible, but context implies one gets exactly the best to give him the best chance in Ikharat. Your worldly situation is a custom-designed algorithm optimized for your ultimate success in the afterlife.
Exactly. Whatever name it you have, the money, the health, the family, and crucially, whatever name it you do not have is not a random distribution of luck. It is a highly specific, flawlessly tailored curriculum designed just for you.
So bringing this back to daily life, this framework mathematically annihilates the concept of jealousy.
Oh, completely.
Think about how much of our anxiety is comparative. You look at your colleague who got the promotion or the influencer with the perfect house, and you feel a visceral pang of envy. You feel deprived. You feel like the universe gave them a bigger slice of a finite pie. But within this physics of spirituality, the pie isn't finite, and no one is getting less.
The author states it so clearly. Since Allah is just, you should know any nemat you get or don't get or is less than someone else's optimized for you. Your colleague's massive salary is not a reward. It is their specific, highly optimized test. Can they handle the wealth without arrogance?
And the guy on the rusty bike.
That lack of wealth is his highly optimized path. Maybe wealth would have destroyed his humility. Maybe the struggle is exactly what he needs to build the spiritual muscle required for ultimate success. They aren't competing for resources. They are sitting in entirely different exams.
And when you deeply internalize that, the author says, we lose our fear and jealousy. We look back and realize we lived very, very well. You stop looking sideways at everyone else's paper. You just look at your own exam. Your struggles aren't punishments, they are guardrails.
And this isn't just theoretical. The author builds very specific daily actions on top of this philosophy. If you truly believe the ocean is infinite and your provision is guaranteed and optimized, you stop hoarding out of fear. This is why the text strongly advocates for extreme generosity, specifically suggesting giving away 1/3 of your income, if not more, as sadaqah.
Giving away 1/3 of your income, that is a staggering amount in a modern economy, but it proves you actually believe the needle in the ocean, math. You can't give away 33% of your resources if you're operating on a scarcity mindset. It's putting your money exactly where your theology is.
It is the ultimate proof of trust. The author also emphasizes the paramount importance of continuous supplication, of dua. They label it the most powerful sabab, or the most powerful action one can do. And they specifically highlight doing this in the quiet isolation of the night during tahajjud.
It's the constant return to the baby camel. Ask, ask, ask. And specifically, the text advises asking for afiyat, for holistic well-being, safety, and ease.
Right, because you are admitting you don't know what's best.
The author beautifully summarizes this dynamic, saying, our own actions follow our duas. We just take very, very small baby steps, and Allah takes us along.
It's a complete relinquishment of the heavy lifting. You don't have to carry the world. You just have to take the tiny, sincere baby step, and the infinite ocean handles the momentum.
Which brings us to the ultimate synthesis of this incredible document. The author provides a final, elegant formula for achieving that elusive peace of mind we started talking about. They say that to be truly grateful, you must be razi, completely content and pleased with 3 specific dimensions of time: the past, the present, and the future.
And they assign specific spiritual tools to manage each dimension. To find peace with your past and your present requires sage patience and a profound acceptance of the divine decree.
Meaning you stop fighting what already happened.
Right. It means looking back at your traumas, your failures, and your current struggles, and accepting that it was all part of the flawlessly optimized test. You stop fighting reality.
And then to find peace with the future, which is the great, terrifying void where almost all human anxiety lives, requires courage. Tawakkul, which is absolute, radical trust, and having good expectations of the divine. You expect the ocean to provide, even if you can't see the water yet.
And you don't achieve this by gritting your teeth and forcing yourself to be stoic. You achieve it by asking for it.
The author makes a claim at the end of this journey that sounds almost absurd at first glance. They conclude that if you adopt this entire framework, if you internalize the physics, embrace your zeroness, and trust the perfect provider, life is actually, quote, trivially easy.
Trivially easy. In a world of disease, economic collapse, and heartbreak. But within the meticulous logic of this handbook, it is undeniably true.
It really is.
If you drop the crushing delusion that you are in control, if you stop the exhausting mental gymnastics of justifying your flaws, if you abandon the scarcity mindset that breeds jealousy, the existential weight of living just evaporates. You are just the guy pedaling the rusty bike, completely unbothered by the billionaire's jet, just enjoying the fact that you get to ride.
It is a radical departure from everything the modern world tells us about how to succeed. The messy reality of the human mind isn't a mechanical failure you have to repair. It's a condition you simply submit to the Creator.
It's surrendering the illusion of control.
And so, we want to leave you with a final thought to mull over long after this audio stops playing. Think about your own life right now. Think about the one thing that is causing you the most stress, the biggest disappointment, the door that just slammed in your face, the lack of a specific resource you desperately want.
We all have one.
We do. The text suggests that this very circumstance is a perfectly tailored, flawless optimization for your ultimate success. If you woke up tomorrow morning and truly believe down to your bones that your biggest current disappointment was actually a custom-designed safeguard meant specifically to protect you, how would that change the way you walk through your day?